He's worth more than most countries' GDP. He still lives in the house he bought in 1958 for $31,500. He could buy an island tomorrow and not notice the dent in his balance. Instead, he drives himself to work and orders from the same fast food menu he's ordered from for decades. This isn't a story about someone hiding from money. It's a story about someone hiding behind it. Because here's the paradox at the center of extreme wealth. The more a person has, the less they tend to show. And once you understand why, you'll never look at a Rolex, a mansion, or a luxury car the same way again. Logic says the opposite should be true. If you built a fortune, wouldn't you want the world to know? Wouldn't the mansion, the watch, the private jet feel like proof, evidence that the hard years were worth it? For some, yes, that instinct is real, and it's ancient. But look closer at the wealthiest people on Earth. Not the newly rich, not the influencers, not the people renting a Lamborghini for a weekend, and a strange pattern appears. The higher you climb the wealth ladder, the more invisible people tend to become. Warren Buffett still lives in that same Omaha house. Ingvar Kamprad, the billionaire founder of IKEA, was known for driving an old Volvo and flying economy class well into his fortune. Mark Zuckerberg is famous for wearing the same gray t-shirt year after year, despite running a company worth hundreds of billions of dollars. None of this is an accident. It's a strategy. Psychological, historical, and economic all at once. And to understand it, we have to go back further than any of these names. We live in the most visually documented era in human history. Every purchase can be photographed. Every lifestyle can be broadcast. And so, paradoxically, showing off has never been easier. And the truly wealthy have never worked harder to avoid it. Sociologists have a term for the old instinct to display wealth: conspicuous consumption, coined by economist Thorstein Veblen in 1899. His theory was simple. Humans buy expensive things, partly to signal status to others. For over a century, that theory explained a lot. Big houses, big cars, big rings. But somewhere in the last 2 decades, a counter-trend emerged. One strong enough that fashion journalists gave it its own name: quiet luxury. Clothes with no visible logos. Bags that only another wealthy person could identify by stitching alone. Homes with no gate, no name, no online footprint. This isn't a rejection of Veblen's theory. It's an evolution of it. The signal didn't disappear. It just became coded, understood only by those wealthy enough to read it. And behind that code lies something deeper than fashion. It lies in psychology, in history, and in raw survival. Start with history, because this behavior is far older than any billionaire alive today. In medieval and Renaissance Europe, governments passed what were called sumptuary laws, legal restrictions on who was allowed to wear certain fabrics, colors, or jewelry. In parts of Italy, England, and Japan, dressing above your class wasn't just frowned upon. It was illegal. The lesson those societies learned early: visible wealth creates visible targets. Displaying status without power to protect it invited resentment, taxation, even violence. That lesson never disappeared. It just went underground. Modern security experts have long noted that visible affluence is one of the most common triggers for kidnapping for ransom schemes and targeted burglary in wealthy communities worldwide. Family offices, the private firms that manage billionaire fortunes, routinely list personal security and privacy as leading reasons for structuring assets through trusts, shell entities, and anonymous LLCs. Not primarily for tax purposes, for safety. Then there's the financial research. The 1996 book, The Millionaire Next Door, by researchers Thomas Stanley and William Denko, remains one of the most cited studies of American wealth patterns. Their findings surprised readers at the time. The majority of actual millionaires in the U.S. did not live in wealthy neighborhoods,
drive luxury cars, or wear designer clothing. Many lived modestly, drove used vehicles, and were frequently mistaken for middle class. Meanwhile, the people driving the flashiest cars and wearing the most visible logos were often not the wealthiest. They were frequently high earners with high debt, spending to appear rich rather than be rich. The wealth and the display, it turns out, are often inversely related. Consider Ingvar Kamprad again, not as a statistic, but as a case study in contradiction. For years, journalists tried to reconcile the image. A man who built one of the largest furniture empires on Earth, yet flew economy, shopped at discount markets, and drove a 15-year-old car. When asked about it, he reportedly said that if he began spending lavishly, he'd expect the same from his employees, and the company's low-cost identity would collapse from the inside out. His frugality wasn't a performance for cameras. It was armor for a brand. And some who studied him suggested a psychological anchor to the values he held before the fortune arrived. Compare that to a very different, very public case. The wave of lottery winners studied by behavioral economists over the past several decades. Multiple academic studies, including research published in the Journal of Health Economics, have tracked sudden wealth recipients and found a consistent pattern. Those who dramatically escalated visible spending after winning were statistically more likely to face bankruptcy, strained relationships, and psychological distress within a few years. Two different worlds, two different outcomes. One hides wealth and multiplies it. The other displays wealth and often loses it. The difference isn't luck, it's psychology. Why would anyone hide the thing they worked their whole life to build? Three forces are at work, and they rarely appear alone. First, social comparison theory. Psychologist Leon Festinger proposed in 1954 that humans constantly measure their worth against others nearby. For the ultra-wealthy, this becomes a trap. Show too much, and you invite comparison, envy, and eventually, isolation. Many billionaires have quietly admitted that visible wealth doesn't attract more friends, it attracts more requests. Second, the hedonic treadmill. Research in positive psychology, most notably a landmark 2010 study by Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman and economist Angus Deaton, found that emotional well-being rises with income only up to a certain point, after which additional income buys diminishing happiness. Objects that once felt exciting stop registering as anything special. The visible symbols of wealth, ironically, stop meaning anything to the people who can afford them. Third, loss aversion. Behavioral economists have shown again and again that humans fear losing what they have more than they desire gaining more. For someone who has already reached the top, there is far more to protect than to prove. Visibility isn't a reward at that stage. It's a liability. Put simply, the poorer psychology chases status. The richest psychology protects position. But there's a layer beneath even this, one that reframes the entire mystery. Because true generational wealth doesn't just avoid display. It avoids identification altogether. Some of the largest fortunes in the world aren't held by any recognizable name at all. They sit inside multi-generational family trusts, structured specifically so that no single visible person can be tied to the money. No address can be traced, no headline can attach a face to the number. This isn't paranoia, it's design. Because visible wealth doesn't just attract envy or crime, it attracts scrutiny from regulators, from tax authorities, from competitors, from the public itself. The families who have held fortunes across multiple generations tend to share one trait: near total invisibility. Not because they have something to hide from the law, but because visibility itself is a cost with no clear return, which raises an uncomfortable question. What if the truly powerful were never the ones on magazine covers at all? What if the visible rich, the flashy, the branded, the loud, are simply the newest, least experienced layer of wealth, still learning the lesson the oldest fortunes learned generations ago? You don't need a fortune to learn from this pattern. The lesson underneath it applies at any income level. Spending to signal status to others is, according to decades of behavioral research, one of the least reliable paths to lasting security or happiness. The dopamine from a visible purchase fades fast. The financial cushion it could have built does not. The people who quietly build wealth over decades, the ones studied in The Millionaire Next Door and dozens of studies since, share a simple habit. They stopped trying to look successful and started trying to be secure. It isn't about depriving yourself. It's about noticing the difference between spending that impresses people who don't care about you and building something that protects the people who do. So the next time you see true extravagance, the watch, the car, the mansion with the gate wide open for cameras, ask yourself a different question than the one you're supposed to ask. Not, how rich is this person? But why do they need me to know? Because somewhere, right now, in a modest house, on an ordinary street, in a car nobody would look at twice, there is someone worth more than the visible display could ever suggest. They learned long ago the one rule the newly rich haven't yet discovered.